right, I think we can get started. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about expanding our concept of wellness. I am Sandra Crespo. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am clinic director for Columbia Associates in the DMV. That's our DMV market in Maryland, one of the Maryland clinics. So I've been here for I think a little over 2 years, not too much, but it has been a great experience so far, and I am very excited to talk to you guys about this particular topic. This is a whole slide around who I am, but I really just like to capitalize on the fact that I am outside of my professional world, somebody who feels the world very deeply and is just trying her very best, just like everybody else here, in this very unpredictable current space that we are existing in. And so that is I. I am originally from Boston and I have been in the DMV for about 8 years. So let's get right into it. Today's objectives, we're going to be talking a lot more so about wellness in a different form. That brings us to the metacognition part. We're going to be taking a wellness approach from a cognitive lens. We're going to be looking at different perspectives, and we're going to do two activities, and we're going to take some questions and answer, Q&A at the very end. This more than likely won't take up the whole hour. I hope it does not, because I really do want to hear from you guys. And please use the chat proactively throughout our conversation here. And then, once we hit the Q&A session, I'll come back to those questions and, draw up the discussion from them. So let's start. So this is a really quick exercise. I'm going to give you guys about maybe 3 minutes to jot down the answers to this. This is to get your critical thinking sort of warmed up. You're hosting dinner. Dinner is at home with your friends and family, and you are to choose 3 of these invites, 3 of these individuals to join your dinner. And I'd like for you to rank them from first choice, second choice, and third choice. And just throw it up in the chat. Just, 2, 4, 5, or 3, 2, 1, whatever those may be. So if you guys can do that now, take a second to do that. Okay, 5, 2, 3. Anybody else want to share? Okay. Let's get a couple more of you guys on there. Would love some active engagement to make the hour worth it for all of us. Yeah. All right. 5, 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. Very good. The next step of this is no, let's not go to the next yet. I would like to hear a little bit about your why. So I'm going to just randomly pick from the chat, and if you're comfortable sharing your why, please unmute yourself and share. So I am looking at 5. 5 is definitely a popular invite. Looking at Denise Trexler Solomon. Would you be comfortable sharing your 512?
Guess it was a little random in the 512. I more so chose people who I wouldn't have picked and took them out of there. Meaning like
Okay.
the famous politician was not on the board for me, and a person who makes homophobic statements was not on the board for me. So the rest, I kind of was just a little more random with the picks.
Okay.
So
you went through more so of who you wouldn't want there.
I did.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. So it was more like a backwards kind of process.
It was a backwards process for me. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Dana Marvel.
Yep, I'm here. I put 234
Hmm.
because wanted to help somebody who was in need, like a homeless woman, and provide, a
Hmm.
healthy or fulfilling meal. The immigrant with depression and off medication, just offer some support, see if I could, offer resources or, at least provide you might be able to try here. And then the famous politician to see if I could affect change in that person's thinking in any way. Especially if that combination of people work together, maybe the politician's viewpoint would be changed a little bit.
Okay, very good. Some what do I want to say? Some rationale to your thinking there. All right. And then we'll pick one last person. I have here Ashley Hutton. 3, 2, 1 is what I see.
Sorry, my mic wouldn't unmute. I think that I did a lot of the same, similar things as other people, obviously, but I went back and forth because there was pieces of me that almost wanted the famous politician, almost wanted, a person who makes homophobic statements to be able to provide them with possibly a place to learn and
Hmm.
possibly a place to kind of get some education, and maybe get some new and interesting, thoughts about the things that they are so, you know, passionate about, um, to see the kind of the other side.
Hmm.
So kind of went back and forth, but in the end, I kind of did some of the similar things of like, no, I think these would be the people I would want to have dinner with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm hearing you wanted a different perspective. I'm hearing that you wanted to understand the other side a little bit more as to why so passionate about certain things that maybe don't readily make sense to you. Um, so what we all have done, and for the rest of you who have participated via the chat, thank you, is somehow our brains have kind of fallen into a really quick, calculated way of thinking when asked to, you know, do an exercise or complete an exercise. And our brains are very much influenced by our surroundings, right? Our responses are very much influenced by what we do every day and what we're surrounded by and come in contact with. And so when we look at these, a drug addicted mother of two, a homeless woman, an immigrant, a famous politician, successful professional with HIV, and a person who makes homophobic statements, whether we want to or not, naturally we have a certain uh, vision or a certain picture of what these people could look like. And it's not necessarily based on race, it's not necessarily based on any particular thing, or it could be based on all of those things. So I want you to pay attention to that, right? And how you processed to, to the choices that you made and what were the visions, what were the pictures that came to mind when you read those things. And then we can go on to the next slide. And these are your peoples, right? We have a drug addicted mother of two, which we have Nicole Richie. This isn't somebody that readily comes to mind when we think about a drug addicted mother of two. She has been very open about her drug recovery journey or her recovery journey and being sober and being a mother. Um, so she's not somebody we immediately think about. Then we have Jennifer Lopez, who has been open about her homelessness when she was just kind of beginnings of, catapulting her career and some of the things that she's been through in life. And we definitely don't think about her as a homeless woman, right? We have Jim Carrey, who is an immigrant and has been open about not being on medication and his battle or journey rather with depression and just understanding that about himself and how he has chosen to deal with it. Definitely are not thinking in that way. And also, when we think about immigrant, we don't necessarily think Canadian, right? We don't necessarily think outside of maybe readily what we hear so much and what's pounded into our minds um, via news and social media. When we think immigrants, we think sort of south of America. But immigrants, of course, as we all know, is all encompassing. Then we have a famous politician, and as you guys can imagine, he would be a joy at the dinner table, right? And then we have Mr. Sheen, and this is somebody who is professional. This is a professional actor with HIV. And as you guys know, he's been extremely open about it, but is this somebody that we immediately think about? Maybe not. And then we have Tracy Morgan, who is somebody who has been called out for making homophobic statements, both in his comedy and just, how he has talked about the topic. And when we look at a comedian, we tend to maybe justify a lot of what they do as just comedy, it's funny. But really, these are some topics that may be sensitive to some, right? And we don't immediately think about somebody who's making homophobic statements as a comedian. We actually maybe think, at least I can speak for myself, when I did this exercise, I'm thinking somebody who was just extremely close-minded, who was just lived in a small town, who was never really exposed, that kind of thing, right? And he's anything but. So this is really just to counteract a lot of what we immediately think about, and how we process our thinking when looking at certain titles, looking at certain categories, and really pausing to make sure that we're not being influenced by what's going on around us, but that we remain objective. So this is really just a way to kind of get us thinking, and leads us to our next slide. So knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. I put this in all of my presentations. This is one of my favorite, most simplistic quotes. And you guys can imagine it to be, it's self-development, right? Like the growth and self-awareness is definitely something that catapults a lot of other things in our lives, both professionally, personally, in all kinds of categories. But for us, it really begins with us, with our own awareness. And so we can move over. And so let's get into a little bit of what wellness is. So as you guys know, wellness has a lot of categories, and what we're missing here is financial. Now, when we talk about mental, emotional, we're talking about managing stress, emotional intelligence, growing that, understanding the world around us, coping, right? Different defense mechanisms that we use, and finding balance in that. And we talk about professional is our career satisfaction, work-life integration. I use integration very specifically instead of balance. It's more realistic. Physical, of course, we talk about movement, nutrition, getting enough sleep, social, support systems, workplace culture, spiritual, connected to a belief or faith or any kind of higher power, or energy that speaks to us. But the one area, one dimension that we don't really talk a lot about is cognitive wellness. And what does that actually mean? Like, what is that? We may have some abstract idea of what that means, right? Growth mindset, metacognition. I would love for you guys to use the chat and just write down the first word that comes to mind when I say cognitive wellness. I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds to do that. Just kind of get on the chat and just spit out the first word that comes to mind. Coping tools. Okay. And feel free to unmute yourselves too if you guys want to use the chat, or if you just want to just kind of say it out loud. Peace of mind is good. I can. Thoughts. Okay. Very good. I'll take one or two more maybe. Clarity. Very good. Okay. So we can go to the next slide. So all of those are correct, right? All of those, there is no right or wrong. All of those fall into that umbrella. And so when we think about cognitive wellness, I want to introduce to you guys the term metacognition. What does this actually mean? And for those who have heard it, great. For those who have not, metacognition is essentially thinking about thinking. It is the process of thinking, there's a term attached to that process, and that's what we call metacognition, and it is an umbrella term, right? How do our thinking habits impact wellness and success? How is it that the way that we see the world, the way that we interpret information, how does that impact our wellness and our success? So Dr. Flavel, back in the 70s, introduced metacognitive theory in child developmental research, more specifically around the perception versus reality for children. So how did children process like Santa Claus being real and then all of a sudden not being real, that kind of example. But it was introduced in that manner. And since then it has grown, and it is the roots of CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, REBT by Albert Ellis. And those types of modalities really are anchored from a metacognition principle. The major aspects of metacognition is metacognitive knowledge. It's the awareness of how we think. It is not just knowing how we react. So if somebody says something and it impacts us, makes us feel a certain way, that is being aware of our feeling. That is being aware of our reaction. It does not equal being aware of how we interpret it and why, right? So if somebody does something or says something that impacts me and impacts my mood, and now my mood has changed or whatever has changed in me, why did that change in me? And why did I have that reaction? I understand the feeling, right? Like I reacted. This is what I did. I need to understand why I reacted in that way. And so this leads to one of the things that Toyota had developed some years back. It's the 5 whys, right? It's almost like a root cause analysis into your why. And that also stems from the concept of metacognition. Metacognitive regulation is adjusting thought processes for better outcomes. So once you have the knowledge and awareness of how we are thinking about certain things, and we sort of do that why root cause, then we are able, right? The goal is to regulate, right? And to train ourselves or maybe retrain ourselves in the way that we think and how we are actually processing the information. And how is this helpful for us, right? It enhances the way that we problem solve, and it's innovative. It's really just allows us to think outside the box and increase our awareness of self. And it improves adaptability, right, in high pressured environments, which is essentially where we work. Mental health is an incredible profession, but it is also a very stressful profession, and there is a lot of burnout. And so how are we able to mitigate that for ourselves? What is in our control? There's so much that's out of our control all the time that we want to be able to look at the things that we can actually control and how do we control them. So let's move on to the next. And so I want to introduce to you guys the JAR theory or the JAR framework. Now, for me, this came about in my master's program when I was just a graduate level social worker and trying to figure out my way in the world and really trying to clarify my purpose, right? And the way that I was looking at impact and the way that I thought about it impacted me is because I would work with people, whether it be communities, individuals, organizations, and I didn't immediately see a result. I didn't immediately see any kind of change, and that impacted me, right? I started to feel like what I was doing wasn't enough, that what I was doing wasn't important, that I really wasn't making a difference. And it started to increase me burning out because I was like, but I had misplaced the importance, or rather, I had defined impact in maybe not a weird way. I had not yet explored it. And so I took it upon myself to explore invisible impact. And from that came the JAR theory, or the JAR framework, as I like to call it. And so I introduced this to you guys, and follow me here. Imagine a group of people in a circle. One person is handed a tightly sealed jar and tries to open it, but it's stuck. They pass it to the next person. That person tries and passes it again, and the jar goes around however many times, and eventually somebody opens it. Now, does that mean that the last person that opened the jar was the strongest person out of the group? It does not mean that, right? It means that everyone who touched the jar had a role. Each effort mattered, loosening the lid, warming the glass, adjusting the angle. And the final twist only succeeded because of the collective effort before it. And so that simple story for me helped me reframe how I saw progress in clinical work. And it helped me stay rooted in purpose, even when I didn't see results right away. And this is an example, and I'm going to go into what the jar actually means, but this is to tie it to metacognition, is understanding how I was interpreting my purpose and my impact. And so I looked at it from an immediate results perspective. I wasn't getting immediate results. I was not making an impact. And I started to understand, well, why do I think that way? Why is that the way that I define that? Right. And I became a little bit more aware of the process of thinking about it. And that's what led me to the jar. And so the metaphor is, it's kind of, I expanded it in a way that makes sense to me and how it's been published. It's J for journey, recognizing that healing, growth, and progress are all part of a journey. We're not always there for the breakthrough, but we may be the catalyst of that. A is for alignment. Align your practice with purpose, with patience and presence, right? Whether you're a social worker, leader, advocate, whatever it may be, your values and your intentions shape the environment. And even if outcomes aren't immediate, right? And R is ripple, right? Understanding that our work is part of a ripple effect. Every touch matters. Your intervention, your support, listening ear might not produce a dramatic shift, but it echoes forward in ways you may never see, right? And there's peace and understanding that your impact, though silent, is very much important. And so for me, this type of methodology reminds us that sustainable change is rarely a solo act. It's layered, it's collaborative, and most times quiet, right? And when we think about this framework clinically, we can think about our social work principles or counseling principles around systems theory, right? The idea that change is the result of interactions within a system. It's not just one action in isolation, and of course, a strength-based approach. We are trained and intentionally focus on capacity and not deficit. And so this framework, I hope it helps you the same way that it helped me. Really revert back to it whenever I feel like I'm just not, kind of making a difference per se. Now, there are some clients or some people where I have introduced this to, and it's very interesting because I never get this question from social workers or counselors, but I get it from outside of our profession. It's like, why not just break the jar? If we're looking for change, why do you have to pass it around so much? Just break it and get to the point. And it's that kind of if they want to, they would type of mentality. But as you guys know, in trauma-informed care, speed can be harmful, right? And forcing the jar open might re-traumatize someone, disrupt their autonomy, or completely bypass important phases of their healing. And so one of the things that I offer to you guys is that respecting the pace of the process is not weakness, it's wisdom, right? It's restraint. It's honoring the person's timeline and not our agenda. All right. So challenging the way that we think about impact and challenging the way that we think about our place and role in other people's life. This is an alternative way of thinking about that. So yeah, so if you have any questions on this, please put them on the chat and we will absolutely come back to them. So we can go on to now. For those that are not familiar with Carolyn Wonga, she is the CEO of Essence Ventures, and she is a massive leader and a huge advocate for leadership development and just leadership awareness, if you understand what that means. Being an aware leader is kind of what she uses a lot. So the 5 fails a day, I really do encourage you, because I'm going to oversimplify this concept. She has a much longer series on this and goes absolutely in depth of what this is. And so I really do encourage you to look this up. But for the sake of time and for the sake of our presentation, it is a framework that she has offered in a way of quantifying bad days. And it helps us with a recovery strategy, and it what do I want to say? More like it changes our relationship and it improves our relationship with failure, right? And it forces us to explore that relationship with failure. And so typically we avoid failure, right? That is something we don't want to do. We don't want to fail. We more often than not don't have a healthy relationship with failure. When we do fail, when we get rejected, when there's something that doesn't go our way, it is an inward process, right? And it can impact a lot of different things. What this framework introduces is going from avoidance and shame to actually embracing it and building. Kind of the same thing that we've always heard, like learn from your mistakes type of mentality. Now, this takes it a step further by creating a quantifiable way to categorizing your day as bad. So, for example, she uses five because five is the number of grace and says, I'm going to identify what fails are for me. So, the initial step in this process is identifying a fail. What is a fail to you? How do you identify a fail? It could be something that you have no control over and it just didn't go your way. It could be something that absolutely altered your mood and day, and it requires a heavy lift on your end to rectify. It requires, it could be something that maybe you knew better, right? And still hit, right? It still happened, and you should have known better. Anything that you identify as a fail, you go through your day, and when something happens where it's just didn't exactly go your way, does it fit in any of those categories of your identified fail? If it does, you count it as a fail. And so let's say that you get to three fails, you're not allowed to count your day or categorize your day as bad until you get to your sixth fail, right? So if you had five fails that day and you're hitting six at this point, it is okay for you to say, I had a bad day today. Today was not a good day. And then we enter failure recovery, right? You create a failure recovery strategy, which essentially means today I tried. Today I did not have the day that was helpful for me. What do I need to be able to start from scratch tomorrow? And that could mean a lot of different things for different people. It could mean that I just want to go hang out with my friends and completely distract myself from what's happening. It could mean that I need alone time. It can mean that I need to go do X, Y, and Z. You create a recovery strategy for that day and you honor it, right? And so you allow yourself to honor the system that you create, and it basically creates a bandwidth. Expands your bandwidth. It grows your bandwidth for dealing with bad, right? Like, what does bad actually mean? What does that actually mean? It is also another way of looking at a bad mood and separating it from a bad day. We can be in a bad mood. It does not mean that the day has been bad, because the day could easily just be normal, right? Nothing has really happened today, but our mood has been altered for whatever reason. And throughout that day, I've had this mood that I can't shake. And that does not mean that my day is bad. It means my mood is bad. And so it allows you to tease that out. Again, any questions on this, feel free to throw them on the chat, but I really do encourage you guys to chop this down and look it up a little bit more in depth. This I have used with, the clients that I typically use this with is more what I like to call my cerebral clients that are very kind of higher end on the intellectual from there, and really have these types of analytical conversations, and they quantify things, and that type of brain. This seems to help them to make sense of them, to make sense of what's going on. People that don't have a good angle of living in the gray is a good approach. And so we can keep going. Now, the other thing that I want to introduce to you guys is secondary trauma informed self-care. It's a mouthful, STISC. Now, we've all heard of secondary trauma, right? Secondary trauma is emotional and physiological impact experienced by someone who has been exposed to other people's trauma, AKA all of us, AKA mental health as a profession, no matter the lane that you're in mental health. So what does secondary trauma informed self-care mean? It essentially means going inward. It means exploring the way that you are able to balance and receive other people's experiences while not impacting your own. What does that look like? If your friend is calling you because they are going through a really, really difficult divorce, let's say, and there's a lot going on there, and you notice that her story or his story is highlighting, I don't like to use the word trigger, but like highlighting some things for you that you have not maybe yet made peace with, and it's making you uncomfortable and it's doing certain things. You are aware of those things. And so you start to look at how can you show up for this person that doesn't compromise yourself so that it allows you to be there for that person. So essentially looking at boundaries for other people's best interests. My boundaries allow me to be there for you. Right? My boundaries keep me afloat in a way that I can then show up for you. And this secondary trauma informed self care is just exactly that. It is self care that is informed by what I am going to experience by being in the proximity of that person, or that community or that organization or whoever the client is. And the result of this can be the clarity that it gives to our, and to a balanced nervous system, so that we are not compromising ourselves, that we're not pouring from an empty cup, that we are honoring our own capacity for helping. And also, it is important for most of us to be a good friend, to be a good family member, to be a good coworker. That holds weight, right? We value those things and we want to be able to meet those expectations, but everybody needs different things to be able to meet those expectations, and meeting expectations can look different for everyone. Um, so again, any questions on this, we can come back to. So we can move forward. So we can do, so this activity is meant for you guys to take back with you, is really just an example of how we can debug our brain. And this is really based on our EBT, right? Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy by Dr. Albert Ellis. And it's an arm of CBT, if you guys are familiar. And if you're not, I certainly encourage you to look this up. But the principles of this is to understand that our thoughts are rooted in something, um, or maybe not at all. So when we think about a negative or unproductive thought, I put an example here, but I'm going to use a different example. And it says, let's say you applied for a promotion and you didn't get said promotion. From a debugging your brain standpoint, what we need to be aware of and what we need to pause, which is essentially step 4, is practicing pause, is saying, why am I feeling so horribly about this rejection, right? Or denial of this promotion? Is it because I start to feel like I'm not adequate enough to fulfill that position? I'm not qualified? All of this negative self-talk, what is all of that? Is that what's happening? That's identifying your thought pattern. Step 2 in doing this is, what is that based on, right? What is my thought pattern right now? Is it based on evidence, right? This is where we get into that imposter syndrome type situation where I completely have reframed imposter syndrome. If you guys ever have had a conversation with me, but the imposter syndrome concept itself is really not rooted in anything, right? Imposter, it's by definition, it's pretending to be somebody that you're not. And that is not what we're doing. The feeling that we're experiencing when we are experiencing this imposter syndrome is really a feeling of uncomfortability in a new environment. And that's natural. You actually want that. It is a growth indicator. And so when you are in a space where you're not entirely familiar, the reason why you feel uncomfortable is because you have told yourself that in order for you to be qualified and in order for you to have a seat at the table, you must know everything about that particular position or that particular role. And if you don't know everything to its minute detail, and you don't know how to solve every single problem that comes around across your desk, you are not equipped and you are not appropriate for that role, and therefore I am an imposter. And we see that that thought pattern is rooted in absolutely nothing but our own negative self-talk, and it is not based on evidence. And so when we go to step 3, we optimize our mental code, right? What does that mean? We start to reframe it. And that's what we did with the imposter example. Instead of an imposter feeling, we actually have more of a growth indicator feeling. That means that I am in a place where I am allowed to grow. There is so much of me that needs to read. I'm coming in with openness. I am humble. I understand what I don't understand, and I am willing to learn. And this is actually motivating me. That is a complete reframe. Then I don't belong here. I don't know anything, all or nothing thinking, etc. And our step 4, which I mentioned earlier, is practicing pause, right? So we want to always, whenever we really get into these kind of patterns of thinking like that, we just pause for a minute. And in that pause, if writing things down helps, if recording things helps, whatever it may be, practice that, honor that, create that as a framework for yourself, and then start with step 1. Okay. And then this is just kind of wrapping everything we just talked about, right? Putting it into practice. When we talk about redefining failure, we're identifying our 5 fails and creating a repair process for ourselves. We are committing to metacognitive growth, which begins with an open mind. We don't know what we don't know, but I know that I am thinking of it this way, and I want to know why. I want to know, why do I think about things this way? A great place to start is Young Pueblo. I don't know how many times, I don't know how many people have heard of this. He's one of my favorite authors. He talks a lot about self-development and the concept of attachment and how that impacts us as an individual. And it's some deep writing there, some deep things to think about. And like I said earlier, Dr. Armour Ellis is another big one. We go inward, right? We start to internalize new perspectives on impact and boundaries. We practice pause and understanding that perfection is not the goal, therefore giving ourselves grace. We instill practice and reframing, and more so, we also commit to getting to know ourselves from different angles. And so I put in the 16 personalities test because it's really just one example of many that gives us insight into different angles of ourselves, or, insight into ourselves from different angles, rather. um, get to know yourself, right? Get to know yourself in different categories from different people and put yourself in a position that the feedback that you're going to get doesn't feel personal, but it feels more constructive, right? And so when we talk about the self care being trauma informed, understand that when you're doing this for yourself and you're growing this practice for yourself, you want to identify people that are appropriate and that fit into how you're able to take this on. So you certainly don't want to ask somebody who is a chronic offender and doesn't use language that is helpful or appropriate, and it's only going to send you into a spiral, right? You want to be cognizant around who your support group is in this journey of yours. And so I think we can move forward and really open it up. We have about a good 20 minutes. And I would love to hear from you guys. I'd really like to hear your thoughts, any questions, or any experiences that you've had with clients around any of these concepts. And feel free to unmute your mic or use the chat, either way. Nothing from anybody? What does so this conversation that this presentation that you just heard, what brings up for you guys? What comes up for you guys? I'm gonna end up calling on people. Don't make me do it.
I think the conversation about the 5 fails is really interesting. It makes me think about one of my clients that I've been seeing since I believe October or so. But she really struggles with the idea of feeling like a failure when she isn't able to accomplish something simple like putting her laundry away or something like that. So I think I'm just trying to think of how that I can incorporate this conversation into sessions with her to kind of really help her define what that means and how it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad day. Exactly what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think failure is a very interesting concept. One of the things that we sometimes don't think about, and we had this topic come up yesterday in the presentation, is the comfort that some individuals feel in failure, right? There is not this admission of it, because I don't know that sometimes they're even aware of it, but there is a certain comfort in living in that failure space because there is nothing that they need to meet. They're already meeting that expectation. There is certainly fear involved and all kinds of other things, but maybe with your client exploring the actual word failure, what does that actually mean, and starting very, very basic around foundationally understanding what the word failure means, even bringing it up as a definition from the dictionary. What does this mean, and how do you interpret that word, right? What is that relationship with failure? Does sometimes failing, does it make you feel comfortable in a way because maybe you know what I mean? Whatever it is, I'm just kind of throwing some hypotheticals out there. But sometimes we miss the very basic steps around just understanding the word for what they may be interpreting it versus just having sort of like a general assumption of like what this word means for everybody. So maybe that can help a little bit. Anyone else with thoughts? All right. So what I will, oh, do I have somebody? I'm going to put on the chat my email. I am always more than willing to connect for future discussions, or even if you wanted to kind of maybe process some of this stuff with any of your clients, etc. I am always available. I am here. But I certainly do not want to hold you guys if you guys have gotten everything that you've needed from this time together. So thank you, and certainly stay connected.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack.